The political landscape of Central Europe in the late 15th century. It was the year 1450. And Central Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms and principalities locked in a delicate balance of power. The Holy Roman Empire, under the weak rule of Emperor Frederick III, had failed to assert its dominance over the fragmented states of its vast territory. The feudal system still held strong, but growing tensions and rising dynastic ambitions were beginning to reshape the region. Among these emerging powers was the Kingdom of Bohemia, a land that held both strategic and cultural significance in the heart of Europe. At the time, Bohemia was ruled by George of Podebrady, a nobleman who had seized the throne in a turbulent series of events. George's reign was marked by internal strife, as he faced resistance from both Catholic factions and the Bohemian nobility. The Hussite Wars, which had torn the kingdom apart earlier in the century, had left deep scars on the Bohemian political landscape. George's rule was unpopular with both the papacy and much of the nobility, which had led to political instability and weakened the kingdom's influence in the region. The complex web of alliances and hostilities across Europe was further entangled by the Habsburg dynasty's ambitions in Austria and the rising power of Brandenburg, a region ruled by the Hohenzollern family. The Habsburgs, under Emperor Frederick III, sought to expand their influence across Central Europe, while Brandenburg, though not yet a dominant force, was steadily building its own power base. The rise of the Hohenzollern family. Barbara of Brandenburg was born into a world of political intrigue. Her father, John of Brandenburg, was a member of the Hohenzollern family, which had steadily risen to prominence over the centuries. The Hohenzollerns were initially a family of lesser nobility, but through astute political maneuvering and strategic marriages, they had secured powerful territories in Brandenburg and the surrounding regions. Barbara's mother, Margaret of Bavaria, was also from a royal family, and her marriage to John of Brandenburg solidified the Hohenzollerns' position as one of the most influential families in the Holy Roman Empire. Barbara's early years were shaped by the power struggles within the Hohenzollern family as they sought to maintain their position amidst the shifting alliances of Central Europe. Though the family was still consolidating its power, Barbara's education and upbringing reflected the expectations placed on her as a future queen consort. The political machinations of her family were not lost on her, and from a young age, she was groomed to become a diplomat, a queen who would play a crucial role in the political affairs of her time. Bohemia and the quest for stability. Meanwhile, across the border in Bohemia, George of Podebrady's reign was coming to an end. The Hussite Wars, which had begun as a religious conflict, had left deep divisions within the kingdom. Bohemia, once a powerful kingdom in its own right, had been severely weakened. George had attempted to hold the kingdom together through diplomacy and the promotion of a moderate version of Hussitism. But his efforts had alienated both the Catholic factions and many of the Bohemian nobles. In 1471, after George's death, Vladislav II of Hungary was elected as King of Bohemia. Vladislav was a member of the Jagiellon dynasty, a powerful family that ruled over several regions in Central Europe, including Hungary, Poland, and Bohemia. He was a young and relatively untested monarch, and his accession to the throne was the result of a carefully orchestrated alliance with the Bohemian nobles who sought to secure their own positions in the post-Hussite kingdom. However, Vladislav's rule would not be easy. Bohemia was a kingdom in turmoil, its noble factions still in conflict over the control of the throne, and the influence of external powers, including the Habsburgs and the Hohenzollerns, loomed large. It was in this volatile environment that Barbara of Brandenburg would come into play. Her marriage to Vladislav II was not simply a romantic union, but a calculated political move that would have lasting repercussions for both Bohemia and Brandenburg. Barbara's early life and education. Barbara, though young, was already well aware of the intricate web of alliances and power plays that defined her world. Raised in the court of Brandenburg, she was educated not only in the traditional arts expected of a noblewoman but also in the subtleties of court diplomacy. Her tutors, scholars, and advisors taught her not only how to manage a household and engage in the arts of literature and culture, but also how to navigate the complex political world of Central Europe. Barbara's education was tailored to prepare her for the monumental task of becoming a queen. She was taught the languages of Europe, Latin, German, French, so that she could communicate with the royal families across the continent. She studied the intricacies of court politics and the importance of building alliances through marriage, understanding that these alliances could shape the future of entire nations. From a young age, Barbara exhibited a sharp intellect and a keen understanding of diplomacy. Her family recognized her potential as a powerful political asset, and they began to consider possible suitors who could further cement the Hohenzollern family's place in the European power structure. The Bohemian throne, currently occupied by Vladislav II, was an appealing prospect. Vladislav II's search for stability. Vladislav II, at the time, was in need of a queen who could help him stabilize his reign. Despite being crowned King of Bohemia, he lacked the strong foundation of power that many of his predecessors had enjoyed. The kingdom was divided, the nobility fractured, and the influence of the Hussite movement still lingered. The nobility had grown accustomed to wielding significant power, often undermining the authority of the crown. Vladislav's challenge was to unite the factions within the kingdom and solidify his rule. His marriage to Barbara would prove to be an essential part of this effort. The idea of a marriage between Barbara and Vladislav had been floated for some time. The Brandenburg family saw it as a way to further their own interests in Bohemia. While Vladislav's advisors understood that a union with the Hohenzollerns would strengthen his claim to the throne and provide him with a powerful ally in Brandenburg. The political advantages of such a marriage were clear. The Hohenzollerns brought not only their noble status but also their resources, influence, and connections to the court of Bohemia. Barbara's marriage to Vladislav II, therefore, was not just a union of two individuals, it was a strategic partnership that would have far-reaching consequences for the political landscape of Central Europe. The marriage proposal. The winds of politics in Central Europe were ever shifting, with the dance of diplomacy and power playing out in the courts of the royal families. For Barbara of Brandenburg, her life's course was not one dictated by her personal desires, but rather by the needs and ambitions of her family. The Hohenzollern family, having steadily expanded their territories in Brandenburg, now sought to cement their position in the heart of Europe. The Kingdom of Bohemia, under the rule of Vladislav II, was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Barbara's marriage to Vladislav II was not conceived in the romanticized manner that fairy tales would later depict. It was a calculated political move, a union of convenience designed to solidify ties between the two powerful families and ensure the security of their lands. The Hohenzollerns were keenly aware of the importance of Bohemia, a kingdom straddling the German-speaking and Slavic regions of Europe, both culturally and geopolitically significant. For Vladislav II, this marriage was equally essential. As a young king struggling to assert his authority over Bohemia, he needed a queen who could offer both political support and diplomatic leverage. The marriage proposal was discussed in the courts of both families, and negotiations between the Jagellons and the Hohenzollerns were careful and deliberate. The political ramifications of such an alliance were clear. The union would not only strengthen the ties between Bohemia and Brandenburg but also help Vladislav II stabilize his rule. A queen with the power and prestige of Barbara would undoubtedly bolster his credibility in the eyes of both his nobility and his foreign allies. For Barbara, the prospect of marrying Vladislav II was not only a duty but also a way to elevate her family's position on the European stage. It was an opportunity for her to expand her own influence, to move beyond the confines of Brandenburg and have a say in the affairs of a larger, more volatile kingdom. The Hohenzollern family knew that securing a marriage to the Bohemian throne would significantly improve their standing in the Holy Roman Empire. Despite the political calculations behind the match, there was a certain excitement in the air. For Barbara, the idea of becoming queen was both thrilling and daunting. She would soon leave the familiar confines of Brandenburg, entering a new world full of challenges and responsibilities. Vladislav II, too, seemed to recognize the importance of the union. He had been king for some years but struggled to consolidate his power among the fractious Bohemian nobility. A strong and capable queen by his side was not just a luxury, it was a necessity. The wedding, a grand political ceremony. In 1476, the union was formalized. The wedding between Barbara of Brandenburg and Vladislav II was not merely a private ceremony. It was a momentous occasion for all of Central Europe. Held in Prague, the capital of Bohemia, The wedding was a lavish affair that drew dignitaries from across the region. The city of Prague, historically a center of culture and trade, was the perfect backdrop for such a significant event. The wedding itself was a spectacle, a grand occasion filled with festivities that would have been the talk of Europe for weeks. The presence of important European noble families and political figures underscored the significance of the marriage. Though Barbara was not the first choice for Vladislav II's bride, having been overshadowed by other potential suitors, her union with the Bohemian king brought her immediate prominence on the European political stage. Barbara's beauty and regal bearing were well noted by those who attended the wedding. She was a figure of elegance, dressed in the finest silks, with her long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, a tiara placed delicately atop her head. Yet, beyond her appearance, it was her sharp intellect and the power of her lineage that garnered the most attention. She was the daughter of John of Brandenburg, a nobleman of great influence, and her presence at the Bohemian court was symbolic of the growing power of the Hohenzollern family. As the new Queen of Bohemia, Barbara's role was immediately clear. She was not simply Vladislav II's wife, she was his political partner. Their union would be one that shaped the future of Bohemia and Brandenburg alike, as their shared interests aligned them against external threats and internal instability. The wedding was not only a personal bond, it was a political alliance that would have far-reaching consequences for both kingdoms. Barbara's role in Bohemia's political landscape. Though Barbara was new to the Bohemian court, her presence immediately began to influence the political dynamics within the kingdom. As queen, she was expected to support her husband, but she also understood the power that her position could wield. Bohemia was a kingdom in flux, its nobility divided, and Vladislav II's reign was far from secure. To stabilize his rule, Vladislav needed more than just military support, he needed legitimacy and backing from the powerful families within the kingdom. Barbara, with her keen political instincts, immediately began to navigate the treacherous waters of Bohemian politics. Her ability to understand the intricacies of court politics and her calm demeanor allowed her to gain the trust of the nobility. The Bohemian court was riddled with factions, each vying for influence over the king. But Barbara's position as a member of the Hohenzollern family gave her an edge. One of Barbara's first significant moves was to engage with the Bohemian nobility, attempting to bridge the gap between the king and his vassals. Many of the nobles were resistant to Vladislav II's rule, having supported George of Podebrady, and some were eager to challenge the king's authority. Barbara, however, with her diplomatic training and understanding of court politics, began to negotiate. She met with key noble families, engaging in delicate discussions that slowly began to shift the balance of power. In addition to her influence over the nobility, Barbara was also a mediator between Vladislav II and the external powers threatening the stability of Bohemia. The rise of the Habsburgs in Austria and the growing influence of the papacy were constant concerns for the king. And Barbara's connections to the Hohenzollern family in Brandenburg allowed her to act as an intermediary between Vladislav and these influential figures. Her strategic mind helped ensure that Vladislav II was seen as a king of strength and dignity in the eyes of both his people and the outside world. While Vladislav continued to face challenges within Bohemia, Barbara's influence made his position far more secure than it had been before their marriage. Strengthening the Bohemian-Thuringian alliance. Barbara's marriage to Vladislav also strengthened the alliance between Bohemia and Brandenburg, two important powers in Central Europe. The Hohenzollern family's growing influence would be crucial in the coming years. As the political landscape of Europe continued to evolve, Barbara's role in maintaining this alliance was not only diplomatic but also personal. Through her connections, Barbara helped facilitate further political marriages between the royal families of Europe, solidifying her family's standing across the continent. The ties forged between Bohemia and Brandenburg during this time would set the stage for the future growth of both kingdoms. Though Barbara's role in these alliances would not always be without its difficulties. Her marriage to Vladislav II was just the beginning of her journey in the political sphere. Over the years, Barbara would prove herself to be more than just a queen consort. She would become a political force in her own right, one whose actions would resonate throughout Europe for generations to come. Vladislav II's challenges. Vladislav II, newly crowned as the King of Bohemia in 1471, faced a kingdom in disarray. Although he was a member of the powerful Jagiellon family, his rule was far from secure. Bohemia, historically a strong and influential kingdom, was recovering from the wounds left by the Hussite Wars, which had polarized the kingdom along religious lines. The Catholic majority of Bohemia viewed the Hussites, who had held power during the war, with distrust, and the nobility was divided between those who supported the old Catholic order and those who wanted to preserve the reforms initiated by the Hussites. Vladislav II's rise to the throne had been facilitated by the nobility. But that same nobility was often skeptical of his ability to maintain control. His election had not been universally popular, especially among the higher echelons of Bohemian society. George of Podebrady, the previous king, had attempted to guide the kingdom into a period of relative peace. But his death left a vacuum of power. This political instability created fertile ground for intrigue, resistance, and external pressures from neighboring powers such as the Habsburgs and Hungary. Vladislav II had inherited a kingdom whose loyalty he had to win. And this task proved to be more difficult than he had anticipated. Despite his noble lineage and the support of powerful families, his reign was marred by unrest and rebellion. The Bohemian nobility, accustomed to wielding power, was not willing to submit easily to the authority of a king who had yet to prove himself. Vladislav II found himself struggling to balance the competing factions within the kingdom, many of whom were more interested in their own interests than in supporting the monarchy. Barbara's role in Bohemia's political landscape. In the early years of their marriage, Barbara of Brandenburg's role was pivotal in securing Vladislav II's rule. Her influence, although subtle at first, quickly became evident in the way she managed the court and navigated the complex political situation in Bohemia. As queen consort, Barbara was not only Vladislav's partner but also his trusted advisor, providing counsel that was both practical and politically astute. Barbara had been raised in a court where diplomacy and political maneuvering were part of daily life, and she understood the importance of alliances. Her marriage to Vladislav II was not just a personal union but a political strategy that brought with it the support of Brandenburg, a rising power in the Holy Roman Empire. Barbara's diplomatic expertise allowed her to navigate the turbulent waters of Bohemian politics with skill. She understood that Vladislav could not afford to alienate the nobility, but she also recognized that the crown's authority needed to be strengthened in order to maintain the stability of the kingdom. One of Barbara's first significant moves was to engage with the Bohemian nobility. Recognizing that many of the nobility were loyal to George of Podebrady, she sought to bring them into the fold by offering them assurances of influence within the new regime. Through her charm, intelligence, and steady hand, Barbara was able to forge a network of loyalists within the court, which would prove to be invaluable to Vladislav II in the years to come. While Vladislav II was a king with noble intentions, he lacked the diplomatic savvy to navigate the political complexities of his reign. Barbara, on the other hand, possessed both the strategic vision and the communication skills necessary to gain the trust of the various factions within Bohemia. By fostering relationships with influential noble families, she was able to build a bridge between the king and his most powerful subjects. The growing influence of Barbara. As the years passed, Barbara's role in the court grew more significant. She was no longer just a queen consort, she had become an indispensable advisor to Vladislav II. Her influence extended beyond the confines of the royal court, as she became involved in foreign diplomacy as well. The Habsburgs, a rising power in the Holy Roman Empire, were a constant threat to Bohemia's stability. Vladislav II, though well-meaning, was not particularly skilled at dealing with the Habsburgs or other external powers. Barbara, however, had a clear understanding of how to deal with the shifting dynamics of European politics. In her role as queen, Barbara helped broker several important diplomatic agreements, most notably with the Habsburgs. At the time, the Habsburgs were gaining control over more territories, including Austria and parts of Hungary. They were a force to be reckoned with, and Barbara recognized the importance of maintaining peaceful relations with them. Through a series of diplomatic missions, she helped secure alliances that not only strengthened Bohemia's position but also reinforced her family's power in Brandenburg. Barbara's ability to mediate between conflicting factions in Bohemia and negotiate with foreign powers brought much-needed stability to Vladislav II's reign. While he struggled with the nobility and the growing external threats, Barbara acted as a steady hand that guided the kingdom through these tumultuous times. Her diplomatic acumen proved essential in maintaining peace and stability in a kingdom that was often on the brink of civil unrest. Building bridges with the Bohemian nobility. One of the most crucial aspects of Barbara's political strategy was her ability to navigate the complex relationships within the Bohemian nobility. The nobles, who had long been accustomed to wielding considerable power, often chafed under the idea of a monarchy that would reclaim authority. Many of them were disillusioned by the chaotic period following the Hussite Wars, and their allegiance to the king was far from guaranteed. Barbara worked tirelessly to ease these tensions. She employed a diplomatic approach, emphasizing the shared interests between the monarchy and the nobility. She understood that the key to gaining the nobles' loyalty was to make them feel included in the decision-making process. Rather than confronting them directly, she sought to forge alliances with powerful noble families by offering them roles of influence and wealth in exchange for their support. At the same time, Barbara was careful not to alienate the more moderate elements of the nobility who had been loyal to George of Podebrady. She acted as a conciliator, bridging the gap between opposing factions and ensuring that Vladislav II did not appear as a divisive figure. Her diplomatic prowess helped solidify her position within the court and made her one of the most influential women in Central European politics at the time. Barbara's influence on Vladislav II's policies. Barbara's political acumen extended into the realm of domestic policy. She had a deep understanding of the importance of securing the kingdom's financial stability, which was critical for consolidating Vladislav II's power. During this period, Barbara worked closely with Vladislav to implement reforms that would stabilize Bohemia's economy and strengthen the monarchy. While Vladislav II's reign was often seen as one of political uncertainty, Barbara's influence helped guide the kingdom through these challenges. She worked to establish a more centralized system of governance, ensuring that the monarchy could exert greater control over the nobility. Her role in advising Vladislav on these matters was crucial, and her efforts helped ensure the stability of Bohemia for years to come. Vladislav II's dependence on Barbara. As time passed, it became clear that Vladislav II increasingly relied on Barbara for counsel. While he had initially been hesitant to cede authority to his queen, Barbara's diplomacy, intelligence, and political acumen proved indispensable. Vladislav was not a strong king in terms of personal authority, but Barbara's guidance provided him with the tools to navigate the political landscape of Bohemia. Barbara's role as a queen consort evolved into that of a co-regent, a woman whose influence on the kingdom was unmatched. Her ability to manage court politics, broker alliances, and influence policy allowed Vladislav II to focus on other matters, knowing that his queen had the kingdom's best interests at heart. The nobility and the struggle for control. The first few years of Vladislav II's reign were marked by a series of power struggles within the Kingdom of Bohemia. The nobility, many of whom had supported the reign of George of Podebrady, were reluctant to accept the authority of the new king. Vladislav II, though well-intentioned, found himself caught between two competing forces: the powerful Bohemian nobles, who had traditionally wielded significant influence, and the external pressures of maintaining a strong and centralized monarchy. While Barbara of Brandenburg had played a key role in gaining the loyalty of certain noble families, her efforts were often met with resistance from others who sought to maintain their own power within the kingdom. The nobility was not a monolithic group. It was divided into factions, each with its own interests and ambitions. Some were loyal to Vladislav II, but many others saw an opportunity to assert their independence from the crown. These tensions came to a head in the years following the wedding of Barbara and Vladislav II. The marriage had initially been celebrated as a strategic political alliance, but the political realities of ruling a divided kingdom quickly became apparent. Vladislav's inability to consolidate power, coupled with the growing dissatisfaction of the nobility, created an environment ripe for dissent. At the center of this discontent was the matter of taxation and land rights. The nobility, accustomed to a high degree of autonomy under the reign of George of Podebrady, resented any attempts by Vladislav II to reassert the monarchy's control over the kingdom's resources. Several powerful noble families refused to pay taxes directly to the crown, instead asserting their right to collect taxes on their own lands and distribute them as they saw fit. This fragmented the kingdom's finances and weakened Vladislav's ability to act decisively. Barbara, ever the political strategist, understood that the key to maintaining stability in Bohemia was to bring these factions together. She had already established herself as a trusted advisor to her husband, and now her diplomatic efforts were needed more than ever. Recognizing that the nobility would never accept centralized control without significant concessions, she worked tirelessly to broker peace agreements between the king and the various factions. Her negotiations were painstaking, as she had to walk a fine line between appeasing the nobles and ensuring that Vladislav's authority was not undermined. Her diplomatic skills were tested as she balanced the competing interests of the nobility with the need for a unified kingdom. Over time, she succeeded in securing agreements with several key families, granting them certain privileges in exchange for their loyalty to the crown. Barbara's influence over Vladislav II's policies. Throughout these turbulent years, Barbara's influence over Vladislav II continued to grow. She had become his closest advisor, a position that went beyond that of a mere consort. Vladislav increasingly turned to Barbara for counsel on matters of governance, recognizing that her ability to navigate the complex political terrain was unparalleled. Her insights into the political dynamics of Bohemia and her understanding of the nobility's concerns allowed her to craft policies that struck a delicate balance between centralized authority and noble autonomy. One of the most significant reforms Barbara helped implement was the introduction of a system of land grants and titles that rewarded loyalty to the crown. By offering the nobles a share in the kingdom's wealth in exchange for their allegiance, Barbara managed to secure the loyalty of many powerful families. This system, while not perfect, helped to stabilize Vladislav II's rule and reduced the number of uprisings against the crown. However, Barbara was not content to merely appease the nobles. She understood that Bohemia needed a strong central government in order to compete with its external rivals, particularly the rising power of the Habsburgs in Austria. She pushed for reforms that would increase the crown's control over the kingdom's finances and military, ensuring that Vladislav had the resources he needed to defend Bohemia against outside threats. Barbara's influence over Vladislav extended to the realm of diplomacy as well. She played a key role in negotiating alliances with other European powers, particularly Hungary, where Vladislav had previously ruled. Her connections to the Hohenzollern family also proved invaluable in securing alliances with Brandenburg and other northern German states. Through her diplomatic efforts, Barbara ensured that Bohemia remained a key player in the politics of Central Europe. Despite the internal turmoil that threatened to destabilize the kingdom, Barbara's role as a mediator. Perhaps Barbara's greatest contribution during this time was her ability to act as a mediator between the various factions within Bohemia. As the queen, she was uniquely positioned to build bridges between the monarchy and the nobility, something that Vladislav II himself struggled to do. Where Vladislav saw only opposition, Barbara saw opportunity for compromise. Her ability to foster trust among the nobles and ensure that they felt represented in the king's policies was crucial to maintaining peace within the kingdom. She was a deft negotiator, able to convince even the most resistant nobles to come to the table and make concessions for the sake of the kingdom's unity. Through her efforts, Barbara was able to secure the loyalty of key noble families, effectively ensuring that Bohemia would not fall into chaos. Her diplomatic prowess was not limited to domestic affairs. Barbara also worked tirelessly to strengthen Bohemia's position in Europe. With the growing threat of the Habsburgs in Austria and the rising influence of the papacy, it was essential that Bohemia align itself with powerful allies. Barbara's background in diplomacy, her sharp intellect, and her understanding of European politics made her the ideal figure to handle these delicate negotiations. Barbara's cultural influence. While Barbara was primarily known for her political and diplomatic efforts, she also played a significant role in the cultural life of Bohemia. She was a patron of the arts, supporting the creation of architecture, literature, and music that would shape Bohemia's cultural legacy. Her influence was particularly evident in Prague, where she helped to fund the construction of new buildings and the expansion of the city's cultural institutions. Barbara's patronage of the arts helped to establish Bohemia as a center of culture and learning in Central Europe. She supported the development of the University of Prague, one of the oldest universities in Europe, and played a key role in fostering an environment where artists, scholars, and intellectuals could thrive. Her cultural contributions helped to enhance Vladislav II's image as a king who not only upheld the traditional values of the monarchy but also embraced the ideas of the Renaissance, which were beginning to take root in Central Europe. By promoting the arts, Barbara ensured that Bohemia would be remembered not only for its political achievements but also for its cultural contributions to the European Renaissance. The growing dependence of Vladislav II on Barbara. As the years passed, Vladislav II's dependence on Barbara became more apparent. While he was a capable king in his own right, his lack of political acumen meant that he was often at the mercy of the more powerful factions within the kingdom. Barbara, on the other hand, had proven herself to be a shrewd and effective ruler in her own right. Her ability to mediate between competing factions, her diplomatic successes, and her cultural contributions all played a crucial role in securing the stability of the kingdom. Vladislav II, though a king by title, had grown increasingly reliant on Barbara to manage the affairs of state. He would often turn to her for advice on matters of governance, foreign policy, and diplomacy. Barbara's influence extended far beyond the confines of the royal court. She had become a powerful political force in her own right, one whose actions would shape the course of Bohemia's history for years to come. Conclusion. A queen in full command. Barbara's early years as queen consort of Bohemia were marked by her tireless efforts to stabilize the kingdom and secure her husband's rule. Through her diplomatic skills, her ability to mediate between competing factions, and her cultural contributions, Barbara not only strengthened Vladislav II's reign but also cemented her own legacy as one of the most influential women in Central European politics. Her role as a mediator, diplomat, and cultural patron helped Bohemia navigate the complex political landscape of the time, ensuring that the kingdom would remain a vital force in the politics of Central Europe. Strengthening alliances through Barbara's family connections. By the mid-1480s, Barbara of Brandenburg had firmly established herself as a political force in Central Europe. Her marriage to Vladislav II of Bohemia, though initially seen as a strategic union, had transformed into one of the most significant partnerships in the region. As queen consort, Barbara's diplomatic acumen and deep family connections began to play a key role in reshaping Bohemia's relations with its neighbors and strengthening the standing of both her family and her husband. Barbara's Hohenzollern heritage provided her with powerful connections, not only to the Kingdom of Brandenburg but also to other influential families in Europe. Her father, John of Brandenburg, had solidified the Hohenzollern dynasty's position in the Holy Roman Empire, and Barbara's marriage to Vladislav II was a direct extension of that influence. The union with the Jagiellon family, one of the most prominent royal houses in Europe, brought together two powerful dynasties, each with its own ambitions and spheres of influence. Barbara's role in solidifying these dynastic ties was instrumental, recognizing that a strong Bohemia could only survive if it forged alliances with other major powers in Europe. She worked diligently to foster positive relations with her own family, the Hohenzollerns, and the other European courts. Barbara leveraged her marriage not just as a means of consolidating power within Bohemia but also as a stepping stone for furthering the interests of both her family and her husband's kingdom. Her connections within Brandenburg became particularly important as the Hohenzollern family expanded its influence in northern Germany and beyond. The rising power of Brandenburg would later culminate in the establishment of Prussia, and Barbara's role in nurturing the relationship between Bohemia and Brandenburg ensured that Bohemia remained a key player in European politics. The stability of Vladislav's reign, much of which rested on Barbara's diplomatic network, became a cornerstone of the Jagiellon family's long-term interests, securing Bohemia's position in Central Europe, while Barbara's family ties to Brandenburg strengthened the political power of Bohemia. Her diplomacy did not stop at fostering relationships with just her own kin. As Bohemia faced growing external threats from the Habsburgs in Austria and other neighboring states, Barbara used her strategic alliances to bolster her husband's position both at home and abroad. Barbara's diplomatic approach involved both active negotiations and a keen understanding of the complex political landscape of Central Europe. One of her most important contributions was helping to secure Bohemia's position by forging a series of strategic alliances. Not only with Brandenburg but also with Hungary and Poland. Her efforts ensured that Vladislav II was not left isolated in a rapidly changing political environment. In particular, her relationship with the Hungarian court proved invaluable. Vladislav II had previously ruled as King of Hungary, and his connections there were of immense importance to his legitimacy in Bohemia. Barbara worked behind the scenes to reignite the connections with Hungarian nobles and factions that had supported Vladislav's reign there. Through this, she managed to reintegrate Bohemia into the broader network of Central European powers, where Vladislav could more effectively contend with threats from the Habsburgs and other regional actors. Barbara also recognized the need for Bohemia to maintain a delicate balance between supporting the Catholic Habsburgs and the more reform-minded factions within the Holy Roman Empire. The marriage between Vladislav and Barbara was emblematic of this balance, as it tied the two royal houses together, creating a link between the Catholic powers in the empire and the more reform-oriented factions that Bohemia had supported during the Hussite Wars. This balancing act was critical in maintaining the kingdom's autonomy in the face of external pressure. The marriage of diplomacy, strengthening dynastic alliances. As the 1480s progressed, Barbara continued to act as an ambassador for her family, fostering even more crucial marriage alliances that would come to shape the political landscape of Central Europe. One such marriage was that of her daughter, Elizabeth of Bohemia, to the Duke of Bavaria. This union was part of Barbara's broader strategy to cement Bohemia's position as a stabilizing force in the region. Through the marriage of her children, Barbara secured lasting political ties with Bavaria, another rising power in the Holy Roman Empire. Barbara's involvement in these dynastic marriages was not simply a matter of political convenience. Each of these alliances had a direct impact on the future of Bohemia, creating webs of interconnected power that transcended individual rulers and ensured that the kingdom remained influential in European politics. Through her efforts, Barbara helped Bohemia stay on the map as a significant player, despite the growing challenges posed by the Habsburgs and the political machinations of neighboring states. The role of women in the courts of this era was often relegated to secondary importance. But Barbara defied this limitation. She was not just a queen consort, she was a key political strategist. Her deep understanding of diplomacy and her ability to use her family's connections placed her in a unique position to shape the future of Bohemia. Her work helped ensure that Vladislav II's reign was not merely defined by his own political struggles, but by the broad alliances that Barbara had skillfully woven. Barbara's personal diplomacy, a key to Bohemia's stability. Throughout this period, Barbara's personal diplomacy became a defining feature of Bohemia's political landscape. Her charm, intelligence, and political instincts made her a central figure at court, while Vladislav II struggled with the intricacies of governance and the nobility. Barbara worked tirelessly to ensure that his policies aligned with the broader interests of both the monarchy and the nobility. One of Barbara's greatest strengths was her ability to communicate with both the highest aristocracy and the common folk. Her approachable demeanor allowed her to connect with the people of Bohemia, bridging the divide between the monarchy and its subjects. Her public persona as a queen who cared deeply for the welfare of her people helped to cement Vladislav II's legitimacy in the eyes of the common folk. Her contributions extended beyond the political realm. She helped to promote a sense of unity within the kingdom during a period of great division. Barbara also had a significant role in reshaping the way the Bohemian court operated. She created a more inclusive environment in the royal court, which, in turn, allowed Vladislav II to maintain control over his kingdom without relying solely on the support of his nobles. Her influence in the court transformed the royal administration, which had been fragmented, into a more cohesive and stable institution. The impact of Barbara's diplomatic efforts on Vladislav II's rule. With the passing years, Vladislav II came to increasingly rely on Barbara not just as a political partner, but as the core of his reign. While Vladislav sought to solidify his control over Bohemia, It was Barbara's diplomatic efforts that truly gave him the leverage he needed to rule effectively. Her extensive family connections and ability to negotiate with foreign powers allowed Vladislav II to focus on the internal affairs of Bohemia. Knowing that his queen had the external relations well under control, Barbara's successful foreign policy and marriage diplomacy helped shape the long-term trajectory of Bohemia. Under her guidance, the kingdom not only navigated through complex political challenges but also positioned itself as a leading force in Central Europe. Vladislav II, though still somewhat dependent on his queen for advice, increasingly became a symbol of Bohemia's stability, thanks to Barbara's ability to strengthen the kingdom's ties to its European neighbors. A queen's legacy. Barbara of Brandenburg's impact on Bohemia was far-reaching. Her strategic use of marriage diplomacy and her ability to secure important alliances with neighboring powers cemented her legacy as one of the most politically savvy and influential women of her time. Her efforts ensured that Vladislav II's reign was not just a passing moment in history, but a period of consolidation and growth for the Kingdom of Bohemia. Through her deft handling of dynastic relations and her deep understanding of the European political climate, Barbara created a web of alliances that would last well beyond her own lifetime. Her ability to influence her husband, Vladislav II, and guide him through the intricacies of ruling a divided kingdom was central to his success. As a queen, Barbara was more than just a consort, she was a true political partner who helped shape the future of Bohemia. The Hussite Wars and Bohemia's religious struggles. The Hussite Wars, which had shaken Bohemia to its core in the early 15th century, left an indelible mark on the kingdom. The division between Catholics and Hussites, a reformist religious group that emerged from the teachings of Jan Hus, had deepened the internal conflicts that Vladislav II inherited upon his ascension to the throne. Though the wars themselves were over by the time Vladislav II came to power, the wounds they caused had yet to heal, and the scars of religious division remained. The influence of the Hussite movement was still deeply entrenched in the Bohemian nobility and the population at large. Many among the nobility, particularly those who had supported the Hussite cause, remained loyal to the ideas of religious reform and autonomy. When Vladislav II married Barbara of Brandenburg, their union was not just a personal or political alliance but also a strategic partnership to navigate the fraught religious landscape of Bohemia. Barbara, who had grown up in a Catholic family and was closely connected to the Catholic courts of Europe, understood that her position in Bohemia would be complicated by the lingering effects of the Hussite Wars. Her marriage to Vladislav II, a monarch who was trying to consolidate power amidst these religious divisions, meant that she would need to find a way to balance the needs of both Catholic and Hussite factions in the kingdom. The Hussite legacy had left Bohemia with a deep sense of religious and political uncertainty. Although Vladislav II himself did not have strong convictions either for or against the Hussite cause, the power of the Hussite factions continued to hold sway in Bohemia. These factions, despite the formal end of the Hussite Wars, remained an influential force, particularly in the regions of Bohemia where they had once held control. To consolidate his power, Vladislav II had to tread carefully between these factions, attempting to avoid alienating the powerful Hussite noble families while also maintaining good relations with the Catholic Church and other European powers. Barbara's role as an intermediary. As a Catholic queen married to a king who ruled over a deeply divided kingdom, Barbara became a central figure in the delicate balancing act that was required to maintain peace between the Catholic and Hussite factions. Unlike her husband, who often sought compromise and was seen as indecisive on religious matters, Barbara took a more active role in mediating between the two factions. Her position as a queen consort allowed her to bridge the gap between religious groups, acting as a conduit for communication between the various factions within the court. Barbara's approach was pragmatic. While she was a devout Catholic, she understood the political importance of the Hussite movement and the need for inclusivity in a kingdom where Hussite nobles held significant power. She recognized that attempting to eradicate the Hussite faith entirely was not a viable option for Vladislav II's rule. Instead, she advocated for a policy of tolerance, encouraging the king to offer assurances to the Hussite nobility that their religious freedoms would not be compromised. At the same time, she worked tirelessly to maintain strong ties with the Catholic Church and Rome, ensuring that Bohemia would not be ostracized for its religious divisions. In her role as a mediator, Barbara engaged in direct communication with leaders from both the Catholic and Hussite factions. Her diplomatic efforts were instrumental in preventing the kind of religious conflict that had plagued Bohemia in the past. She was particularly adept at navigating the complex relationships within the Bohemian court, where different noble families held varying religious allegiances. By playing the role of peacemaker, Barbara helped to diffuse tensions that could have escalated into open conflict. Barbara's influence extended beyond the court as well. She made significant efforts to support the clergy who remained loyal to Rome, using her resources to fund Catholic institutions and promote Catholicism in Bohemia. At the same time, she did not ignore the concerns of the Hussites. By engaging with leaders of the Hussite faith, Barbara helped to ensure that Vladislav II could maintain a measure of stability in Bohemia without provoking religious uprisings. Religious compromise and the Treaty of Basel. One of Barbara's most significant achievements in navigating Bohemia's religious divisions came in the form of the Treaty of Basel, 1499, which was a diplomatic effort to create a compromise between the Catholic and Hussite factions. The treaty, which sought to bring peace between the Catholic Church and the Hussites, was a testament to Barbara's diplomatic acumen. The treaty allowed for religious tolerance within Bohemia, giving the Hussites a degree of autonomy while also recognizing the authority of the Catholic Church. Barbara, through her personal efforts and influence, played a key role in this treaty. She was instrumental in convincing Vladislav II that a moderate approach to the religious divide would help secure his throne and bring long-term stability to Bohemia. The treaty's success hinged on Barbara's ability to present it as a solution that benefited all factions within Bohemia, even those that had historically been hostile to one another. The treaty was not without its critics, and its implementation faced challenges. Some Catholic factions in Bohemia were deeply dissatisfied with the concessions made to the Hussites, while others saw it as a necessary compromise to prevent further civil conflict. Nonetheless, the treaty marked a turning point in Bohemia's religious landscape, offering a pathway to coexistence between the Catholic and Hussite populations. Barbara's support for the Church. Despite her efforts at religious compromise, Barbara's personal devotion to Catholicism remained strong. She used her position as queen consort to champion the cause of the Catholic Church within Bohemia, helping to fund religious projects and support the work of Catholic missionaries. Her patronage of the Church helped to strengthen the ties between Bohemia and the broader Catholic world, ensuring that the kingdom remained aligned with the papacy. Barbara's efforts to support the Church also had a significant impact on Bohemia's cultural and intellectual life. She was a patron of religious art and architecture, funding the construction of new Catholic churches and monasteries throughout the kingdom. These institutions became centers of learning and culture, contributing to the intellectual and spiritual life of Bohemia. Her efforts to support Catholicism did not mean that she ignored the Hussite factions. Barbara understood that Bohemia's strength lay in its ability to maintain a delicate balance between the two religious groups. While she worked to strengthen the Catholic presence in Bohemia, she also sought to ensure that the Hussites were included in the kingdom's political and religious life. Her ability to navigate these religious tensions was a testament to her skill as a diplomat and her deep understanding of the kingdom's needs. The lasting impact of Barbara's religious diplomacy. Barbara's efforts in the realm of religious diplomacy had a profound and lasting impact on Bohemia. Her ability to mediate between the Catholic and Hussite factions helped to prevent further religious conflict and allowed the kingdom to move towards a more peaceful coexistence. The Treaty of Basel, while not perfect, marked a step toward religious tolerance in a region that had long been divided by sectarian strife. Her support for both the Catholic Church and the Hussite faith helped to solidify her legacy as one of the most politically astute queens in European history. Barbara's ability to navigate the complex religious landscape of Bohemia ensured that Vladislav II's reign, though marred by internal conflict, would ultimately be remembered as a time of stability and compromise. In the years to come, the peace that Barbara had helped to broker would provide Bohemia with a foundation on which to build its future. The religious tensions that had once threatened to tear the kingdom apart were gradually eased, and the kingdom emerged from the shadow of the Hussite Wars with a renewed sense of stability. A patron of the arts, Barbara of Brandenburg's political acumen was well known, but it was her influence in the cultural sphere that truly set her apart as a queen consort. She had a vision for Bohemia not just as a kingdom of power and politics, but as a center of culture and intellectual achievement. As a queen with a strong understanding of the arts, Barbara recognized that a thriving cultural environment was not only a mark of prestige but also a powerful tool for strengthening the unity and identity of Bohemia. During the late 15th century, the Renaissance had begun to spread across Europe, and Barbara was quick to adopt and promote its ideas. The intellectual and artistic revival that characterized this period was not just a European trend but a reflection of a deep desire for renewal, particularly in regions that had been scarred by war and division. Barbara's reign coincided with a moment of cultural awakening in Bohemia, and she played an essential role in nurturing this transformation. Barbara, who had grown up in a court where the arts were supported and cherished, saw the benefit of aligning her husband's reign with the cultural innovations of the time. One of her primary objectives as queen was to establish Bohemia as a hub of intellectual thought, artistic expression, and religious devotion. By doing so, she hoped to enhance the status of Bohemia both within Europe and in the broader cultural imagination. Architectural patronage. One of the most significant aspects of Barbara's patronage of the arts was her involvement in architecture. She understood that the built environment of Bohemia, its churches, castles, and public buildings, would serve as a lasting testament to the grandeur of the monarchy and the kingdom. Under her influence, several significant architectural projects were launched in Prague, the capital, and throughout the kingdom. Barbara took a personal interest in the construction and restoration of churches and religious buildings, many of which were infused with Renaissance design principles. She sponsored the building of several Catholic churches, ensuring that the new buildings were not only functional but also aesthetically beautiful. Incorporating the latest Renaissance ideas into their designs, these buildings became a symbol of Bohemia's religious and cultural revival, and many of them remain as monuments to Barbara's vision for the kingdom. Additionally, Barbara's influence extended to the restoration of older Bohemian castles. She understood that architecture was not only about the present, it was a way to connect the kingdom's rich history with its future. The castles she helped restore served as symbols of the power of the monarchy, reminding both the people and the nobility of the long-standing legacy of Bohemia. These architectural projects also played a role in reinforcing Vladislav II's power. They helped to create a sense of permanence and stability in the kingdom at a time when the monarchy's authority was still being contested. By commissioning works that showcased the wealth and cultural vibrancy of the court, Barbara ensured that Bohemia was seen as a flourishing kingdom worthy of respect and admiration. Support for education and intellectual life. Barbara's commitment to the arts extended beyond architecture. She recognized the importance of intellectual pursuits in shaping the future of Bohemia. As queen consort, she worked closely with scholars and artists, encouraging the growth of education within the kingdom. She supported the University of Prague, one of the most important centers of learning in Europe, and ensured that it flourished as a seat of intellectual activity. Barbara's support for the university was not just a matter of patronage, it was an active investment in Bohemia's intellectual future. She provided funding for new academic programs, supported the recruitment of prominent scholars, and ensured that the university became a place where both Bohemian students and foreign intellectuals could engage with the latest Renaissance ideas. Under Barbara's patronage, the University of Prague became a center for humanist thought and a key player in the broader intellectual movement of the Renaissance. In addition to her work with the university, Barbara supported the production of books and manuscripts. She established libraries in the royal court and funded the copying of important texts, ensuring that Bohemia remained connected to the intellectual currents of Europe. These initiatives helped to bring the latest ideas in philosophy, science, and literature to Bohemia, enriching the cultural life of the kingdom and strengthening its intellectual foundations. Cultural diplomacy and international influence. Barbara's influence in the arts and culture extended beyond Bohemia's borders. As a queen who was deeply connected to the courts of Europe, she used her position to promote Bohemian culture on the international stage. She invited artists, architects, and scholars from Italy, France, and other parts of Europe to Bohemia, ensuring that the latest artistic and intellectual trends were imported into the kingdom. Her role as a cultural diplomat was crucial in raising Bohemia's profile in Europe. While many other kingdoms were focused on military conquest and political maneuvering, Barbara saw the importance of soft power, using culture to build relationships, establish alliances, and create a sense of shared identity. She leveraged her connections in the courts of Italy, France, and Spain to bring artists and thinkers to Bohemia, where they could work and collaborate with local intellectuals. This influx of foreign talent transformed Bohemia into a cultural crossroads, a place where European ideas and artistic styles could converge. Through her patronage and diplomatic efforts, Barbara ensured that Bohemia became a center of cultural exchange and intellectual growth. Her efforts helped to integrate Bohemia into the wider European Renaissance, contributing to its recognition as a kingdom of cultural significance. Barbara's role as a patron of the arts in the court. At court, Barbara's influence was felt not only in politics and diplomacy but also in the arts. She was a patron of musicians, poets, and painters, supporting a vibrant court culture that celebrated both the intellectual and the aesthetic achievements of the time. The royal court became a gathering place for artists and thinkers who were drawn to Bohemia by Barbara's patronage. Under her guidance, the court hosted musicians who composed liturgical and secular music, artists who painted religious and secular portraits, and poets who wrote about the beauty of Bohemia's landscapes and its people. These works of art not only enhanced the cultural prestige of the court but also served as a way to express the values and ideals of the monarchy. Barbara's influence on the arts also extended to the visual representation of the monarchy. She commissioned several portrait paintings of her family, her husband, and herself, which were displayed in the royal palace and sent as diplomatic gifts to other courts. These portraits became symbols of Bohemia's grandeur and the strength of its royal family. Through these works of art, Barbara was able to present a unified image of the monarchy that combined political power with cultural sophistication. Legacy as a cultural queen. Barbara of Brandenburg's legacy as a patron of the arts remains one of the defining aspects of her reign. Through her support for architecture, education, literature, and the visual arts, she not only helped to elevate Bohemia's cultural status but also laid the groundwork for the kingdom's future cultural achievements. Her influence on the intellectual and artistic life of the kingdom continues to be felt in the buildings, manuscripts, and artworks that bear her mark. Her legacy as a queen who nurtured the arts and culture, creating a kingdom where intellectual achievement and artistic expression flourished, ensured that Bohemia would not be remembered solely for its political struggles but also for its cultural contributions to the European Renaissance. Barbara's vision for Bohemia as a center of culture and learning transformed the kingdom into a beacon of intellectual and artistic achievement. And her patronage helped to shape the cultural identity of Bohemia for generations to come. Personal struggles within the royal marriage. While Barbara of Brandenburg and Vladislav II's marriage had initially been a grand political alliance, solidified through mutual interests, the long years of partnership began to reveal the cracks in their personal relationship. The weight of ruling a kingdom filled with internal turmoil, external threats, and ongoing religious strife began to take a toll on both the king and the queen. While Barbara had played a pivotal role in securing alliances, calming the nobility, and acting as an influential diplomatic force, the personal strain between her and Vladislav became increasingly evident. Vladislav II, despite his reliance on Barbara for guidance, was often indecisive, and many in the court began to notice the widening gulf between him and his queen. As time passed, Vladislav became more withdrawn, increasingly entrusting the day-to-day governance of the kingdom to Barbara, as he found it increasingly difficult to manage the tensions within the kingdom, let alone his marital life. Though Barbara had once believed in the political necessity of her marriage to Vladislav, over time, the personal aspects of their relationship became more difficult to navigate. Barbara, known for her diplomatic finesse, could not ignore the emotional toll of their growing distance. Her efforts to stabilize Bohemia, to weave a network of alliances, and to maintain the delicate balance between the Catholic and Hussite factions had worn her down. While Vladislav seemed more concerned with the comforts of his court, Barbara was burdened with the real weight of leadership. The pressures of managing the political affairs of a fractured kingdom while maintaining a facade of marital harmony were beginning to crack the foundation of their relationship. Though Barbara's devotion to her role as queen never faltered, she began to feel isolated in her role as the power behind the throne. Vladislav II, while grateful for her support, showed little affection, and the distance between them began to take a personal toll. It wasn't a rift born out of open conflict but rather the quiet erosion of their once cohesive partnership. Barbara, too, faced the painful realization that their marriage, though a political triumph, lacked the emotional connection that she had hoped for in a lifelong partnership. Vladislav II's increasing dependence on Barbara. Despite the personal strains, Vladislav II grew increasingly dependent on Barbara as the years passed. His reliance on her diplomatic and political acumen continued to grow, particularly as external threats began to encircle Bohemia. While Barbara's political skills had solidified her status as a key player in Bohemia, it was her perseverance and determination to protect the kingdom that became essential to her role. She was the true leader behind the throne, steering the kingdom through the storms of factionalism, religious tension, and political strife, all while enduring personal hardships. While Vladislav was content to let Barbara handle the intricacies of governance, his lack of personal involvement in the day-to-day affairs of the kingdom only served to deepen the cracks in their relationship. Barbara had to carry the heavy weight of the monarchy's future alone, often feeling like a leader in her own right, even though she was still merely the queen consort. In many ways, this arrangement reflected the asymmetry in their roles. Vladislav remained the figurehead, while Barbara became the operational force keeping Bohemia afloat. Barbara's relationship with the nobles also became strained as they saw the growing gap between the king and queen. Many nobles respected Barbara for her leadership abilities, but some whispered about Vladislav's growing passivity and reliance on his wife. This created a sense of tension within the royal court, as some factions saw Barbara as the true ruler, while others held onto the hope that Vladislav would reclaim more authority. Despite her growing sense of isolation in the personal sphere, Barbara's leadership remained essential, even though Vladislav's authority and governance had become more symbolic than real. His presence was still necessary for maintaining the legitimacy of the monarchy. This political reality led to a complicated dynamic. Barbara, more than anyone else, knew the importance of keeping up appearances, ensuring that their marriage still symbolized the strength of Bohemia's royal lineage. Growing isolation of Barbara. As the years wore on, Barbara found herself in a situation where her political power and her emotional isolation were becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile. Her diplomatic network was vast, and she still had influence over much of the Bohemian court, but she began to question how much of her life had been devoted to securing the future of the kingdom at the cost of her own personal happiness. The political decisions that she had once made with her husband as a united team now felt like they were being made alone. Vladislav's interest in the personal affairs of the court waned, and his detachment created a void that Barbara struggled to fill. His lack of engagement with the court's political needs placed even more pressure on her shoulders. Though she had proven time and again her ability to navigate the complexities of the political world, the personal toll was becoming undeniable. Barbara also began to realize that her position in the court, while powerful, came at a price. She had made significant sacrifices to ensure the success of Vladislav's reign. But there were moments when she longed for the affection, partnership, and warmth that she had hoped for when she had first agreed to the marriage. With each passing year, it seemed as though the emotional connection between her and Vladislav diminished further, leaving her to navigate the complex web of royal politics alone. Despite this, Barbara remained committed to her duties. She continued to exert her influence on the Bohemian court, ensuring that the kingdom remained stable during difficult times. But her personal dissatisfaction grew, and in moments of reflection, she began to question whether the political success she had worked so hard to secure had come at the expense of her own emotional fulfillment. Vladislav's dependence on Barbara, a kingdom in transition. The strain between Barbara and Vladislav II mirrored the larger transformation taking place in Bohemia. While the kingdom was, by all outward appearances, stable and prosperous under Barbara's guidance, the monarchy was undergoing a subtle shift. Vladislav, once a ruler in his own right, was becoming more of a ceremonial figure, while Barbara's influence and leadership grew ever stronger. This power dynamic was becoming more pronounced, and it reflected the evolving nature of their marriage, a partnership that had begun as one of mutual support but had shifted to a more lopsided arrangement. Barbara continued to play an instrumental role in guiding the kingdom through diplomatic negotiations, ensuring that Bohemia maintained its position in Central Europe despite the growing pressures from neighboring powers. As the kingdom faced external threats from the expanding Habsburgs, as well as internal pressures from factions within the court, Barbara's leadership was invaluable. She ensured that Vladislav maintained his position as king, though it became increasingly clear that she, not he, was the true force behind the throne. At the same time, the queen's growing dependence on her role as the kingdom's primary diplomatic force deepened the emotional and personal isolation she felt. She found solace in her work and in the support of her political network, but she could not ignore the personal emptiness that came with it. This juxtaposition, the satisfaction of her political success and the yearning for deeper emotional fulfillment, became a defining tension in her life. In many ways, it was this tension that would shape the final years of her reign as queen. A turning point, shifting roles and new challenges. By the early 1500s, the nature of Barbara and Vladislav's relationship had reached a tipping point. The political situation in Bohemia had stabilized, but the royal couple's private life had deteriorated. Barbara continued to lead with great skill and determination, yet the toll on her personal life was beginning to take its toll on her health and spirit. Vladislav, for his part, seemed content to let her manage the kingdom, leaving his role as king largely ceremonial. As Barbara's political and diplomatic success continued to shape the future of Bohemia, she faced new challenges that tested her leadership, her emotional resilience, and her relationship with her husband. Though she had become the de facto ruler of Bohemia, Barbara would soon realize that her own life would be marked not only by her political achievements but also by the personal sacrifices she had made to ensure the survival and success of the kingdom. The role of the Habsburgs and other European powers. By the turn of the 16th century, Europe was in a state of flux. The Habsburgs, a powerful family based in Austria, had expanded their territory, becoming one of the most formidable political forces in Europe. Their influence stretched across Central and Western Europe, and they had their eyes set on expanding into Bohemia as part of their broader imperial ambitions. For Vladislav II of Bohemia, this external threat loomed large, and the stability of his rule was increasingly dependent on how well he managed relations with the Habsburgs and other European powers. Barbara of Brandenburg, with her extensive network of diplomatic connections and her nuanced understanding of European politics, recognized the rising power of the Habsburgs early on. Although her marriage to Vladislav II had already secured one crucial alliance with Brandenburg, the growing power of the Habsburgs threatened to undermine the balance of power in Central Europe. The Habsburgs' ambitions were not limited to Bohemia. They sought control over key territories in the Holy Roman Empire, including Hungary, Austria, and parts of modern-day Germany. Barbara's early experience with diplomacy was invaluable in this period. Her background in managing complex political situations and forging alliances with other monarchs gave her the tools she needed to secure Bohemia's position in the face of the Habsburg threat. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes to maintain strong relationships with the Habsburgs while also strengthening Bohemia's alliances with other key European powers, including Poland and Hungary. Barbara understood that in an age of shifting alliances, neutrality could be a dangerous position for Bohemia. She ensured that Vladislav II, though politically weak and more passive, was seen as a powerful player in the broader European context, even if he struggled to exert his own authority over his kingdom. Barbara's diplomatic efforts were aimed at ensuring that Bohemia would be able to navigate the increasingly complex political landscape without falling under the influence of the Habsburgs. The Bohemian-Hungarian alliance. One of Barbara's most significant diplomatic achievements during this period was her success in reinforcing the alliance between Bohemia and Hungary. Vladislav II had once been the King of Hungary, and maintaining good relations with this neighboring kingdom was of paramount importance for Bohemia. However, the Hungarian throne was increasingly vulnerable. and the Habsburgs posed a threat to both Bohemia and Hungary. Barbara knew that the key to resisting the Habsburgs lay in strengthening the ties between Bohemia and Hungary. Through her diplomatic efforts, she helped secure a closer relationship with the Hungarian court. This alliance was essential for both kingdoms' survival, as the Habsburgs were eyeing Hungary as their next conquest. Barbara's diplomatic efforts included facilitating meetings between Vladislav II and Hungarian leaders, including the Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, whose influence was growing in the region. Through her tireless work, she helped broker deals that saw Bohemia and Hungary coordinate military defenses against Habsburg encroachment and supported each other in maintaining political stability within their respective borders. Barbara's relationship with the Hungarian court also had a more personal element, as she had ties to Hungary through her marriage into the Jagiellon family. These familial connections gave her an additional layer of influence in her diplomatic dealings. Through these alliances, Barbara ensured that Bohemia was not isolated but was part of a broader network of alliances capable of resisting external threats. The growing power of the Habsburgs, the threat to Bohemia. As the Habsburg family continued to expand its territories, the balance of power in Central Europe shifted. Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, had been pursuing an aggressive policy of expansion, seeking to solidify his family's rule over Austria, the Netherlands, and parts of Italy. His ambitions extended into Bohemia, and he began to pressure Vladislav II to align with the Habsburgs or risk being marginalized. Barbara understood the magnitude of this external pressure. She worked tirelessly to maintain Bohemia's independence and ensure that Vladislav II did not fall under the Habsburgs' influence. She attempted to create a counterbalance by reaching out to other European powers, seeking their support in resisting the Habsburg encroachment. Her diplomatic skills were crucial during this period, as she was able to convince other European monarchs of the importance of maintaining the independence of Central Europe from the Habsburgs. At the same time, Barbara knew that Vladislav II, despite his growing reliance on her, was a king whose power was increasingly symbolic. She was the one who had to manage Bohemia's foreign policy, securing its place in the broader European context while maintaining the delicate balance between the Habsburgs and other powers. This diplomatic tightrope act, while necessary, placed an enormous strain on Barbara, who had to keep Bohemia's interests at the forefront while navigating the ever-changing political dynamics of Europe. Barbara's strategy in the face of the Habsburg threat. Barbara's strategy in dealing with the Habsburg threat was multifaceted. She continued to strengthen Bohemia's alliances with Hungary and Poland, both of which shared a common interest in curbing the expansionist ambitions of the Habsburgs. She also sought to build relationships with other powers in Europe, including France, which was eager to check the influence of the Habsburgs in the region. One of the key elements of Barbara's strategy was to ensure that Vladislav II's rule was seen as legitimate by both the nobility and other European monarchs. She worked to solidify her husband's position within Bohemia, ensuring that he maintained control over key aspects of governance. At the same time, Barbara understood that her own power within the court was essential to Bohemia's survival. She was the one who could broker deals, navigate diplomatic negotiations, and maintain the kingdom's standing in a world where political allegiances shifted frequently. In her role as queen, Barbara was often forced to make difficult decisions. She had to weigh the political implications of her actions, ensuring that every move she made contributed to Bohemia's long-term security. Her diplomatic negotiations with the Habsburgs and other European powers were carried out with precision and foresight, ensuring that Bohemia was able to maintain its independence in a time of growing external threats. A kingdom in flux, maintaining Bohemia's autonomy. As the 16th century wore on, Bohemia found itself at a crossroads. The growing power of the Habsburgs posed a serious threat to the kingdom's autonomy, and Vladislav II's increasingly passive role as king meant that Barbara bore the burden of safeguarding Bohemia's independence. Despite the personal and political challenges she faced, Barbara remained determined to ensure that Bohemia would not fall into the hands of the Habsburgs. Her role as queen consort had evolved over the years. From a political partner to a de facto ruler, Barbara was the linchpin holding Bohemia's foreign relations together. Her ability to navigate the complex web of European politics allowed Bohemia to maintain its place in the broader European order. though Vladislav II's reign was marked by personal and political struggles. Barbara's diplomatic efforts ensured that the kingdom remained a respected player in Central Europe. Barbara's legacy in external politics. Barbara of Brandenburg's legacy in external politics was far-reaching. Through her diplomatic skills, she ensured Bohemia's survival during a period of great external pressure. Her role in negotiating alliances, her ability to manage Bohemia's foreign policy, and her strategic efforts to curb the Habsburg threat left an indelible mark on the kingdom's history. While her personal life and relationship with Vladislav II may have faltered, Barbara's political legacy would continue to shape Bohemia's future for generations to come. Vladislav II's growing autonomy. As the 1500s progressed, Bohemia found itself at a crossroads. The political environment had shifted, and the king, Vladislav II, began to assert more autonomy over his rule, despite his earlier dependency on his wife, Barbara. For years, Barbara had effectively governed the kingdom, serving as the true leader behind the throne. But as time wore on, Vladislav's desire to reassert his control grew, and he began to take more responsibility for political affairs. While Vladislav's increasing involvement in the governance of Bohemia might have been seen as a sign of strength, it also marked the beginning of the decline of Barbara's direct political influence. For much of their marriage, Barbara had been the guiding force behind the throne, using her political savvy, diplomatic skills, and intelligence to secure Bohemia's position in Europe. However, with Vladislav seeking more control, the power dynamic in the royal court began to shift, and Barbara's role as the principal advisor to the king was no longer as prominent. Barbara, once the de facto ruler of Bohemia, now found herself navigating a delicate balance. As Vladislav grew more involved in the affairs of state, there were times when Barbara felt sidelined. Despite their years of collaboration, she could not escape the growing sense of isolation. Vladislav was often more concerned with his personal ambitions than the kingdom's long-term stability, which frustrated Barbara, who had spent years trying to keep the kingdom on course. In this shift of power, she saw her own role as queen consort weakening, as the king sought to reclaim the authority he had long allowed her to wield. Personal strain and emotional distance. The shift in political power also mirrored the emotional distance that had been building between Barbara and Vladislav for years. Though their marriage had initially been a strategic and political alliance, it had evolved over the years. The early days of their union had been marked by mutual respect and partnership. Barbara had provided the political guidance and diplomatic acumen necessary for Vladislav to navigate his role as king, while Vladislav offered Barbara the security and status of a royal marriage. However, as Vladislav grew more involved in the governance of Bohemia, his emotional distance from Barbara increased. Where once she had been his trusted advisor and partner, she now found herself increasingly on the periphery of his decisions. Her influence in the court, which had once been nearly absolute, began to diminish, while Barbara had been a queen who commanded respect for her intelligence and leadership. The erosion of her political power created a sense of personal frustration and sadness. The distance between her and Vladislav had grown so much that it affected not only their personal relationship but also their ability to work together as rulers. The once strong partnership had now become a mere formality, leaving Barbara to navigate the kingdom's political landscape without the close support of her husband. Declining political influence and Bohemia's transition. Barbara's political decline coincided with significant changes in Bohemia's political landscape. The early years of Vladislav's reign had been filled with diplomatic maneuvers, strategic alliances, and efforts to solidify Bohemia's position in the complex web of European politics. Under Barbara's guidance, Bohemia had grown in importance and influence. However, as Vladislav began to assert his own vision for the kingdom, the necessity of Barbara's political leadership faded. The growing Habsburg power in the region and the changing nature of European alliances also contributed to Bohemia's shifting role in European affairs. Vladislav's focus began to move away from the delicate diplomacy that Barbara had once managed with such expertise. Instead, he turned his attention to consolidating power within Bohemia and ensuring that his monarchy would remain stable in the face of rising external threats. Barbara, while still deeply involved in court affairs, was now relegated to a more ceremonial role. Her influence, once central to the survival and success of the kingdom, became increasingly peripheral. She continued to serve as an advisor, but her role in shaping the kingdom's future was diminished. She had long been the guiding hand of the monarchy, but as Vladislav's authority grew, her political clout began to fade. Barbara's efforts to maintain influence. Despite the diminishing of her political power, Barbara did not resign herself to the sidelines. She continued to work tirelessly behind the scenes to influence decisions that affected the kingdom. Even as her husband's authority grew, Barbara's legacy had always been defined by her determination to protect Bohemia, and she continued to exert herself in any way she could, even if it was no longer as openly recognized. One of Barbara's final political acts as queen was to ensure that Bohemia remained aligned with other European powers that could counterbalance the growing strength of the Habsburgs. She worked to maintain relationships with Poland and Hungary, ensuring that Bohemia was not isolated in the increasingly complex political landscape of Europe. Even as her direct influence waned, her diplomatic connections and political insight remained crucial to Bohemia's position on the European stage. Her efforts were, however, often met with resistance. The nobility, which had once been aligned with her policies and trusted her judgment, began to favor Vladislav's new approach. This shift in loyalty further isolated Barbara and created additional tension between her and the other factions within the kingdom. Although she continued to advocate for policies that would protect Bohemia's interests, her inability to control the political narrative as she had once done left her feeling like a shadow of her former self. Vladislav's growing legacy. As Barbara's influence began to decline, Vladislav II worked to solidify his own legacy. While Barbara had once played a central role in his rule, he increasingly distanced himself from her counsel. Over time, Vladislav began to rebuild his authority, often without consulting his queen. His political decisions were shaped by his advisors, many of whom were less inclined to listen to Barbara's input. Vladislav's growing autonomy as a ruler signified a shift not only in the monarchy but also in the balance of power in Bohemia. While Barbara had once been the force that guided the kingdom, Vladislav took on a more active role, seeking to prove himself as a ruler independent of his wife's influence. Despite this, Barbara remained a respected figure in Bohemia, especially among those who remembered her contributions to the kingdom's stability. However, the legacy of their reign was not one of unchallenged dominance but of transition. Barbara, though no longer the driving political force, had ensured that Bohemia survived a turbulent period, positioning the kingdom to face the challenges of the future. Her role, though increasingly diminished, was foundational to the stability of Bohemia during the critical years of her reign. Barbara's final years and reflection. As Barbara's political influence waned, she found herself in a period of reflection. Her long years of service to Bohemia and her marriage to Vladislav had been filled with both triumphs and challenges. The kingdom was secure, and Vladislav's rule was stable. But Barbara's own journey was marked by personal sacrifice and the complexities of her position as queen. In her final years, Barbara looked back on her achievements with a sense of both pride and melancholy. She had secured the future of Bohemia, navigating the intricate world of European diplomacy and securing the kingdom's place on the continent. Yet, she had done so at great personal cost, and the emotional toll of years of political maneuvering and personal isolation weighed heavily on her. Barbara's legacy would not be defined solely by her political achievements, but also by the quiet strength with which she endured the changing tides of her marriage and her reign. As the queen who had once held the fate of Bohemia in her hands, she would be remembered as a woman who navigated one of the most tumultuous periods in the kingdom's history with grace and resilience, even as the world around her changed. Barbara's legacy in Bohemia and Brandenburg. By the time of Barbara's later years, her influence over the political and diplomatic landscape of Bohemia had diminished. But her legacy endured in the very fabric of the kingdom. While Vladislav II had begun to reclaim more authority, it was undeniable that Barbara had been the backbone of the Bohemian monarchy for much of her reign. Through her unparalleled diplomatic skills, strategic alliances, and dedication to the kingdom, she had not only safeguarded Bohemia's independence but also set the stage for its future. In Brandenburg, Barbara's legacy was equally significant. Through her marriage to Vladislav II, She had not only strengthened the bond between the Hohenzollern family and Bohemia but also secured the place of the Hohenzollerns in the broader European political scene. Her efforts in forging alliances with other royal families, including those in Poland, Hungary, and Austria, had ensured the stability of Brandenburg as a power within the Holy Roman Empire. Barbara's role as a patron of the arts, education, and architecture further shaped the cultural and intellectual legacy of Bohemia. Her sponsorship of the arts and her support for the University of Prague had transformed the city into a thriving center of Renaissance thought and artistic expression. She had brought together the intellectual currents of Europe, allowing Bohemia to become a bridge between the western and eastern parts of Europe. Her patronage of the arts and her support for religious institutions had given Bohemia a cultural prominence that would resonate for generations. In Bohemia, Barbara's influence was visible in every corner of the kingdom. From the grand religious structures that dotted the landscape to the thriving intellectual life in Prague. While her political role had diminished, her cultural contributions ensured that she would be remembered as one of the most significant figures in the history of Bohemia. Barbara's children, a new generation of leadership. One of the most enduring aspects of Barbara's legacy was her children. As a mother, she had raised heirs who would go on to shape the future of Bohemia and beyond. Her children, particularly her sons, were central to the continuation of the Jagiellon dynasty and the political alliances that Barbara had so carefully cultivated during her life. Her eldest son, Louis of Bohemia, was poised to succeed his father, Vladislav II, though his reign was cut short by his tragic death in 1526. His legacy was shaped by Barbara's influence. Through Louis, the Jagiellon dynasty's connection with the Habsburgs was solidified, setting the stage for the future union of Bohemia and the Habsburgs after his death. Barbara's daughters, too, played important roles in European politics through their marriages. Her daughter Elizabeth of Bohemia was married to Maximilian II of Austria, strengthening ties between the Habsburgs and Bohemia. These dynastic marriages, forged under Barbara's careful guidance, continued to influence European diplomacy long after her death. Her children carried forward her legacy of political pragmatism and diplomatic astuteness, ensuring that her influence would live on through them. Barbara's focus on securing advantageous marriages for her children reflected her understanding that, as queen, her greatest strength lay in shaping the future of Bohemia through dynastic alliances. Her children, educated under her watchful eye and shaped by her political experience, were able to continue her work long after she had faded from the political scene. Barbara's impact on Bohemia's religious landscape. Though Barbara had faced many challenges in balancing the religious factions within Bohemia, her legacy in this area was significant. Throughout her reign, Barbara had navigated the delicate religious landscape of Bohemia, a kingdom scarred by the Hussite wars and still divided between the Catholic and Hussite factions. While her personal devotion to Catholicism was unwavering, she understood the political importance of religious tolerance. Her efforts to maintain a balance between the two religious groups contributed to the long-term stability of the kingdom. The Treaty of Basel, which she had helped to negotiate, marked a significant achievement in fostering religious tolerance in Bohemia, allowing both Catholics and Hussites to coexist relatively peacefully. This compromise, while not perfect, was a step toward resolving the deep-seated religious tensions that had plagued the kingdom for decades. Barbara's continued support for Catholic institutions, even in the face of Hussite opposition, reinforced the legitimacy of the Catholic Church in Bohemia. However, she did not alienate the Hussites. By recognizing the importance of their role in the kingdom, she ensured that Bohemia did not slide back into the kind of religious warfare that had devastated it during the Hussite wars. Her ability to balance these competing religious forces was a key factor in the kingdom's political stability during her reign. Her efforts were further reflected in her patronage of religious architecture, as she commissioned the construction of Catholic churches and monasteries in Bohemia. These buildings served not only as places of worship but also as symbols of the kingdom's cultural and religious vitality. Barbara's influence in the religious sphere ensured that the Catholic faith remained a significant force in Bohemia, even as religious tensions continued to simmer. Barbara's lasting cultural influence. Though Barbara's political and diplomatic influence waned in her later years, her cultural legacy continued to shape Bohemia long after her death. as a queen who had been deeply involved in the cultural and intellectual life of her time. Barbara ensured that Bohemia was not just a political player in Central Europe but also a cultural hub. Her patronage of the arts and her support for the intellectual development of Bohemia played a significant role in transforming Prague into one of the leading centers of learning and culture in Europe. Barbara's contributions to the intellectual and artistic life of the kingdom were not just a reflection of her own tastes but were deeply tied to her vision of Bohemia as a kingdom that could compete on the European stage. Both politically and culturally, Prague, under Barbara's influence, became a center of Renaissance art, literature, and thought. Artists, philosophers, and scholars from across Europe were drawn to the city, where they could engage with the latest ideas and contribute to the intellectual and cultural vibrancy of Bohemia. These cultural exchanges, which Barbara had helped foster, laid the groundwork for the continued development of Bohemia as a cultural powerhouse in the years to come. Barbara's legacy as a patron of the arts and culture lived on in the works of artists and intellectuals who flourished in Bohemia during her reign. The buildings, manuscripts, and artworks that bore her mark became symbols of the kingdom's enduring cultural heritage. Even after her death, Bohemia continued to benefit from the cultural institutions and intellectual achievements that she had championed during her time as queen. The passing of Barbara, a queen's enduring legacy. Barbara of Brandenburg's death marked the end of an era in Bohemia's history. While her passing signified the loss of one of the most influential figures in the kingdom, her legacy endured in the institutions she had helped to build, the alliances she had forged, and the cultural foundations she had laid. Bohemia, though changing politically and diplomatically, remained a kingdom that had been profoundly shaped by her vision and leadership. Barbara's story was one of political triumph and personal sacrifice, of navigating the treacherous waters of European diplomacy while facing the challenges of marriage, motherhood, and personal isolation. Her influence in shaping the future of Bohemia was undeniable, and her legacy was carried forward by her children, her alliances, and the kingdom she had helped to steer through some of its most tumultuous times. Her legacy is a testament to the power of diplomacy, cultural patronage, and political astuteness, as the queen who had helped guide Bohemia through a critical period in its history. Barbara of Brandenburg was not just a consort, but a ruler in her own right, a queen whose influence resonated long after her reign. Barbara of Brandenburg's life spanned the tumultuous political shifts and cultural revolutions of Central Europe. From the moment she married Vladislav II of Bohemia, she became more than just a queen consort. She became the lifeblood of Bohemia's survival and prosperity during some of its most challenging times. The marriage that had begun as a strategic alliance gradually blossomed into a partnership of political strength. Though, in her later years, it was tinged with personal isolation and emotional distance. Through the decades, Barbara demonstrated a profound understanding of diplomacy, building alliances with both Catholic and Hussite factions, managing external threats, and ultimately ensuring the stability of Bohemia. Her mastery of political maneuvering was matched only by her deep commitment to the cultural and intellectual development of the kingdom. Prague, under her patronage, flourished as a center of Renaissance art, scholarship, and architecture. The impact of her sponsorship was felt not only in the courts of Europe but also in the very heart of Bohemia, where her efforts would continue to resonate long after her death. Yet, her legacy was not solely one of political or cultural achievement, it was also one of personal sacrifice. As her influence grew, Barbara found herself bearing the burden of rule alone, managing the kingdom's affairs in the face of growing disinterest from her husband, Vladislav. The power dynamic in the royal court shifted, with Barbara's role as the driving force behind Bohemia's successes becoming less visible as Vladislav gradually reclaimed authority. But even in her moments of personal disappointment and emotional distance, Barbara's resolve never faltered. She remained steadfast in her duty to Bohemia, never once losing sight of her responsibility to the kingdom and its people. As Barbara aged, her role in Bohemian politics and governance inevitably diminished. But her influence remained. Her son, Louis, and her daughters, Elizabeth and others, carried forward the legacy of the Jagiellon family, ensuring the continuation of Bohemia's royal lineage through strategic marriages and alliances. while the political landscape of Europe continued to change with the rise of new powers. Barbara's contributions to the kingdom's cultural, diplomatic, and political heritage left an indelible mark on the history of Bohemia. Barbara of Brandenburg passed away at a time when her role in shaping Bohemia's future had already been cemented. Her reign as queen consort, though marked by struggles both personal and political, was also one of remarkable achievement. Her enduring legacy, however, lies not just in the treaties she brokered or the alliances she secured, but in the lasting influence she had on the culture and future of Bohemia. The intellectual and artistic flourishing she fostered, the diplomatic ties she built, and the stability she brought to the kingdom made her one of the most remarkable women in the history of Central Europe. Even after her death, Barbara's influence was felt in the courts of Europe and within the royal houses of Bohemia, Brandenburg, and Hungary. The cultural institutions she helped establish continued to thrive. The artistic heritage she patronized remained an enduring symbol of Bohemia's legacy. And the diplomatic strategies she masterminded kept the kingdom's position secure during uncertain times. The story of Barbara of Brandenburg is one of resilience, foresight, and dedication. As a queen, she navigated the complexities of royal duty, personal sacrifice, and political power with unparalleled grace. In the end, though her direct influence over Bohemia's affairs waned, the legacy of her work, her diplomacy, and her cultural patronage remained a beacon for generations. She was not merely a consort but a queen in every sense of the word, whose impact shaped the course of history in Bohemia and beyond. Barbara's life serves as a reminder that true leadership is not merely about holding power but about using that power to shape the future for those who follow. Her contributions to Bohemia, her legacy of diplomacy, and her enduring cultural influence immortalize her as one of the most significant queens in European history. In a world often dominated by men, Barbara of Brandenburg stood as a towering figure, a testament to the quiet strength and strategic genius of a woman who forever changed the course of Bohemian history.